The basement level of Buckingham Palace fell into an eerie silence as all camera feeds went dark simultaneously. Detective Inspector Sarah Chun knew this was the moment Marcus Webb had been building toward during months of careful planning. Somewhere in the maze of utility tunnels beneath the palace, a trained soldier with nothing to lose was preparing to strike at the heart of the British monarchy. All units, priority 1 emergency, Sarah broadcast into her radio. Immediate deployment to basement levels. Armed response teams to sectors 7 through 12. Bomb disposal units to all utility access points. This is not a drill. Commander Morrison coordinated the response from the command center while Sarah grabbed protective gear and headed for the basement herself. She had spent her career analyzing threats and planning responses, but today felt different. Today, she was racing against time to prevent an attack that could change the course of history. The basement corridors stretched endlessly in both directions, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that cast deep shadows between support pillars and mechanical equipment. Every sound echoed strangely in the confined space, making it impossible to determine direction or distance of any movement. Sarah advanced carefully, her weapon drawn, and senses straining to detect any sign of Webb's presence. Inspector Chun, this is Officer Martinez in command. We've restored partial camera coverage and detected movement in Section 9, near the main utility junction that runs directly under the garden area. Sarah altered her course towards Section 9, knowing that her backup was still several minutes away. Every second Webb remained free in the tunnels increased the danger to everyone above. If he had planted explosives with timer devices, finding him might not even be enough to prevent catastrophe. As she approached the utility junction, Sarah heard sounds that made her blood freeze. Mechanical clicking, like someone assembling complex equipment with practiced efficiency. Webb was preparing something in the darkness ahead, and whatever it was would likely be completed long before help arrived. Sarah crept forward, using the massive pipes and electrical conduits for cover as she tried to get close enough to assess the situation. Around a corner, she finally saw him. Marcus Webb knelt beside a large cylindrical device connected to multiple wires and timing mechanisms. But this wasn't a simple bomb. The sophisticated equipment suggested something far more devastating than conventional explosives. Webb looked exactly like his photographs, but seeing him in person revealed details that pictures couldn't capture. His movements were precise and purposeful, those of someone who had rehearsed these actions countless times. His eyes held an intensity that spoke of absolute conviction in his mission. This wasn't madness. This was calculated determination to accomplish something he believed was necessary. Armed police, step away from the device and place your hands where I can see them, Sarah called out, her weapon trained on Webb's center mass. Webb didn't even look up from his work. Inspector Chun, I presume. You're earlier than I expected, but not early enough to stop what needs to happen today. Whatever you think you're accomplishing, this isn't the way. Innocent people will die. Innocent. Webb finally raised his head, his eyes blazing with fanatical certainty. There are no innocent people in that garden today. Every person attending this event represents a system that values privilege over human life. They need to understand what real consequences feel like. Sarah kept her weapon steady while trying to assess the device Webb was working on. The cylindrical component appeared to be some kind of dispersal mechanism rather than a traditional explosive. Chemical attack, biological agent, or something even worse. The timer showed less than 8 minutes remaining. You served your country for 12 years, Sarah said, hoping to reach whatever remained of the man Webb had once been. You took an oath to protect British citizens, not to harm them. The country I served doesn't exist anymore, Webb replied, returning to his work on the timing mechanism. It's been replaced by a theater designed to distract people from the truth about how power really works. Today, the performance ends. Sarah could hear footsteps echoing in the distance as backup teams made their way through the tunnel system. But 8 minutes might not be enough time for bomb disposal experts to analyze and disarm whatever Webb had created. She needed to find another solution, and fast. What's in the device, Marcus? What are you planning to release? Webb smiled grimly. Chemical compound of my own design. Non-lethal, but highly effective. Everyone in the garden will experience what it feels like to have their comfortable illusions stripped away. They'll see their precious monarchy for what it really is. Sarah felt a moment of relief. Non-lethal meant fewer casualties, but chemical attacks still posed enormous risks, especially to elderly guests or anyone with respiratory conditions. The panic alone could cause stampedes that would result in numerous deaths. The timer is locked, Webb continued. Even if you shoot me, the device will activate automatically. The only way to stop it is with a code that exists only in my head. Sarah knew Webb was telling the truth. His military background included training with sophisticated timing mechanisms that could be programmed with multiple failsafes. Killing him might actually guarantee the attack would proceed as planned. "What do you want?" she asked, knowing that negotiation was her only remaining option. "I want the truth told," Webb replied, his hands never pausing in their work. "I want the Queen to admit publicly that the monarchy is an outdated institution that serves only to maintain artificial class distinctions. I want her to abdicate immediately and recommend dissolution of the royal system entirely." Sarah almost laughed at the impossibility of Webb's demands. Even if the Queen could be reached and convinced to negotiate, no monarch in British history had ever abdicated under terrorist pressure. The precedent would destroy the institution more effectively than any attack. "You know that will never happen," Sarah said. "The Queen won't negotiate with terrorists, and even if she wanted to, the government wouldn't allow it. Then, innocent people will suffer the consequences of their leader's pride," Webb replied coldly. "Sometimes change requires dramatic demonstration of how current systems have failed." The timer now showed 6 minutes remaining. Sarah could hear her backup teams getting closer, but they still needed at least 3 minutes to reach this location. Even then, disarming an unknown device with multiple failsafes could take far longer than the time available. "There's something you don't know," Sarah said, making a desperate calculation. "The Queen isn't attending the garden party today. She was moved to a secure location an hour ago when we confirmed your presence in the building." Webb's hands finally stopped moving. "You're lying. Check the radio frequencies. Listen to the security chatter. There are no references to monarch protection because the monarch isn't here. Your months of planning, all your research into today's event, it's all worthless if your primary target isn't even present." Sarah could see doubt creeping into Webb's expression. His entire plan had been built around striking at the royal family during a public event that would maximize symbolic impact. If the Queen wasn't attending, the attack would lack the meaning that had driven his months of preparation. "The guest list you studied, the timing you calculated, the symbolic significance you wanted to achieve," Sarah continued. "None of it matters if you're attacking an event the Queen isn't attending. You become just another terrorist hurting innocent people instead of making the political statement you intended." Webb pulled out a small radio scanner and began cycling through security frequencies. For several long minutes, he listened intently to the communications between various protection units. Sarah held her breath, hoping that the absence of royal protection protocols would be enough to convince him. "The communications don't reference royal protection," Webb admitted slowly. "But that could be operational security rather than absence of the primary target." "Check the basement access protocols," Sarah pressed. If the Queen were in the building, would security have allowed an unauthorized individual to reach the utility tunnels? Would bomb disposal teams be conducting noisy searches that could panic royal protection details? Use your training, Marcus. Analyze the security response pattern. Webb's expression grew increasingly troubled as he processed Sarah's arguments. His military training had taught him to read security operations, and the current response pattern was indeed inconsistent with protecting a high-value target in the immediate vicinity. "For minutes," Webb said, looking at the timer. "Even if you're right about the Queen's location, there are still hundreds of people in that garden who don't deserve what's about to happen to them." Sarah saw the first crack in Webb's resolve and pressed her advantage. "You joined the military to protect people, not to harm them. Whatever broke during your service, whatever injustices you've experienced, innocent civilians aren't responsible for them." "The system is responsible," Webb replied, but his voice carried less conviction than before. "The people attending this event support and benefit from that system." "Children attend these events," Sarah said softly. "Young people from charities that help disadvantaged communities. Are they responsible for whatever injustices you've experienced? Do they deserve to suffer because you're angry at institutions they don't control? Webb's hands trembled slightly as he stared at the timer, showing 3 minutes remaining. Sarah could see the internal struggle between his desire for revenge and whatever remained of his moral conscience. This was her last chance to reach the soldier he had once been before trauma, and mental illness transformed him into something else. "Give me the deactivation code," Sarah said gently. "Let me help you get the mental health treatment you need. Your grievances against the system may be legitimate, but hurting innocent people won't solve them." For a long moment, Webb sat in silence, staring at the device that represented months of planning and preparation. Then, slowly, he began entering numbers on the timing mechanism's keypad. The display flickered and went dark as the countdown stopped with 2 minutes and 37 seconds remaining. "The code is 8847, Webb said quietly, his hands finally still. "My military service number backwards. I wanted something meaningful for what I thought would be my final act." Sarah kept her weapon trained on Webb while reaching for her radio to call off the emergency response and request medical assistance. The immediate crisis was over, but Webb's story was far from finished. He would need extensive psychological treatment, and his attack on the palace would likely result in terrorism charges carrying life sentences. As backup teams arrived to secure Webb and remove the disabled device, Sarah realized that today's events would raise difficult questions about security procedures, threat assessment, and support for military veterans struggling with mental health issues. Webb's attack had been prevented, but the underlying problems that created him remained to be addressed. The garden party proceeded as scheduled, with most guests never knowing how close they had come to experiencing a chemical attack in the heart of London. The Queen did attend, contrary to Sarah's desperate bluff, and the afternoon unfolded exactly as planned by palace staff. But in the basement tunnels beneath the celebration, crime scene investigators worked to understand how Marcus Webb had come so close to carrying out an attack that could have changed British history. His story would serve as a reminder that the greatest threats to security often came not from foreign enemies, but from those who had once sworn to protect the very institutions they later sought to destroy. 2 hours before the garden party was scheduled to begin, Detective Inspector Sarah Chun stood in the Palace Security Command Center watching feeds from dozens of cameras as guests began arriving for preliminary screenings. The enhanced security measures had created longer than usual delays, but, so far, everyone was cooperating with the additional precautions. Commander Morrison worked frantically at his desk, coordinating with various law enforcement agencies across London. The search for Marcus Webb had expanded to include railway stations, airports, and every hotel within a 20-mile radius of the palace. Despite the massive manhunt, Webb remained elusive, as if he had simply vanished from the face of the earth. Inspector Chun called Officer Rebecca Martinez from her position at the communications console. "We've got something interesting." Traffic cameras picked up a vehicle matching Webb's description 3 blocks from here, but the license plates don't match his registered vehicle. Sarah hurried over to examine the footage. The vehicle appeared to be a delivery van, the type used by dozens of companies throughout London. Nothing remarkable about it except for one detail that made her pulse quicken. The driver wore a cap pulled low over his face and kept checking his mirrors, behavior consistent with someone trying to avoid identification. "When was this footage captured?" Sarah asked. 40 minutes ago. The van was heading toward the service entrance on the east side of the palace grounds. Sarah felt her stomach clench. The service entrance was used by catering companies, florists, and other vendors supporting the garden party. Security there was tight, but focused primarily on preventing unauthorized access rather than detecting sophisticated infiltration attempts. "Give me the manifest for all deliveries scheduled today," Sarah ordered. "Cross-reference with the vehicle information we just captured." Morrison joined them at the console, his face pale as he processed the implications. If Webb has somehow obtained legitimate delivery credentials, he could get much closer to the venue than we anticipated. Officer Martinez quickly pulled up the delivery schedule on her computer. 17 different vendors were scheduled to make deliveries throughout the morning, from fresh flowers to specialty food items. Each had been pre-approved and scheduled for specific time slots, but the sheer volume of activity made comprehensive verification challenging. Here's the problem, Martinez said, pointing to her screen. Pemberton Catering was scheduled to deliver additional serving equipment at 11:30, but they called an hour ago to report their delivery van was stolen from their depot early this morning. Sarah and Morrison exchanged glances. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Webb hadn't just stolen a delivery van. He had stolen one with legitimate access to the palace grounds and scheduled delivery window that would place him at the venue just hours before the event began. What time did the van and the traffic footage pass the cameras? Morrison asked. 11:45. 15 minutes after the legitimate delivery window had passed. Sarah grabbed her radio and called for immediate lockdown of the service entrance. All units, code red at service gate 3. Potential hostile vehicle attempting unauthorized access. Detain all delivery vehicles pending verification. But even as she gave the orders, Sarah knew they might be too late. If Webb had successfully entered the palace grounds using stolen credentials, he could already be in position to carry out his attack. The palace complex was vast, with hundreds of rooms, corridors, and hiding places where someone could remain undetected for hours. "We need to evacuate the garden party," Sarah said urgently. "If Webb is already inside the security perimeter, continuing with the event puts everyone at risk." Morrison shook his head grimly. "I've made that recommendation 3 times in the past hour. The palace staff insists the Queen will not be intimidated by unconfirmed threats. The event proceeds as scheduled unless we have concrete evidence of immediate danger." Sarah understood the royal family's position, but she also knew how quickly security situations could deteriorate. Webb had demonstrated planning, patience, and professional skills that made him far more dangerous than typical threats against the monarchy. His military background meant he understood security protocols and would know how to exploit any weaknesses he discovered. What about the Queen herself? Has she been briefed on the specific threat level? Her Majesty is aware of increased security concerns, but has chosen to maintain her normal schedule. She'll proceed from her private apartments to the garden at precisely 3 o'clock, as planned. Sarah checked her watch. Less than 90 minutes remained before the Queen would expose herself to potential attack. Even with the massive security presence, protecting someone in an open environment against a determined adversary was nearly impossible if that adversary had already penetrated the inner defenses. "Officer Martinez, I need you to pull up architectural plans for the entire palace complex. If Webb is inside, where would he position himself for maximum impact?" Martinez's fingers flew across her keyboard, bringing up detailed blueprints of the palace and surrounding grounds. The garden party area was surrounded by multiple buildings, each with numerous windows and vantage points that could provide elevated shooting positions. Security had identified the most obvious threats, but Webb's military training would help him find alternatives that might be overlooked. "Here's what's troubling me," Sarah said, studying the layouts. "Webb has been planning this for months, but the palace has been hosting garden parties for decades. Every possible attack vector has been analyzed and countered. What does he know that we don't?" Morrison pulled up Webb's military file again, focusing on his specialized training records. Advanced explosive ordnance disposal, urban warfare tactics, psychological operations. But there's something else here I missed earlier. He highlighted a section of Webb's training history that made Sarah's blood run cold. He completed a course in VIP protection. He knows exactly how security details operate, what our procedures are, where our vulnerabilities lie. He's not just planning an attack. He's planning one that specifically counters our defensive strategies. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Webb wasn't just a disturbed individual with military skills. He was someone who understood protection protocols from the inside. He knew how security teams thought, how they positioned resources, how they responded to threats. Fighting him would be like fighting someone who knew all their moves in advance. "We need to assume he's already inside and begin immediate countermeasures," Sarah said. "Full sweep of the palace, starting with areas that provide sight lines to the garden. Every room, every corridor, every possible hiding place." Morrison was already coordinating the search through his radio. Dozens of officers began systematic sweeps of the palace interior, while others took positions around the garden perimeter. The carefully planned elegance of the afternoon's event was giving way to the harsh reality of counter-terrorism operations. Inspector Chun called Officer Martinez urgently. I've got movement on camera 12. Upper floor of the East Wing. Someone in maintenance, clothing moving through areas that should be empty. Sarah rushed to the monitor showing the footage. A figure in coveralls and carrying what appeared to be a toolbox moved purposefully through a corridor lined with offices and storage rooms. The individual's face was obscured by the maintenance cap, but his body language suggested someone trying to avoid attention while moving toward a specific objective. That corridor leads directly to rooms overlooking the garden, Morrison observed. If he reaches any of those positions, he'll have clear sight lines to the entire event area. Sarah grabbed her radio and dispatched response teams toward the East Wing. But she knew that by the time officers reached the upper floors, Webb would likely have moved to a different position. His training would have taught him never to remain stationary when hostile forces were searching for him. He's not trying to hide, Sarah realized suddenly. He's drawing our attention to the East Wing while positioning himself somewhere else entirely. This is a diversion. Morrison immediately understood her logic. Pull-up cameras showing the West Wing and basement levels. If the East Wing activity is a distraction, his real position is somewhere we're not looking. Officer Martinez quickly switched between camera feeds, searching for any signs of movement in areas that should be empty. For several minutes, they saw nothing unusual. Then, Martinez freeze-framed an image from a basement corridor. There, she said, pointing to a shadow that seemed slightly out of place near a service stairwell. Someone is definitely down there, staying just out of direct camera view. Sarah studied the image, noting how carefully the individual had positioned himself to remain mostly hidden while still maintaining mobility. This wasn't the behavior of someone randomly hiding. This was someone who understood surveillance systems and knew how to minimize exposure while maintaining operational capability. The basement level provides access to utility tunnels that run under the entire garden area, Morrison said, his voice tight with worry. If he's positioned explosives down there. Sarah didn't need him to finish the thought. An explosive attack from below would be devastating and nearly impossible to detect until it was too late. The garden party area would become a killing field, with hundreds of guests and members of the royal family caught in an underground blast that no amount of surface security could prevent. We need bomb disposal teams in those tunnels immediately, Sarah ordered. And we need to reconsider evacuation procedures. If Webb has access to the basement level, the entire garden area is compromised. But, as she spoke, Sarah realized they might already be out of time. Guests were arriving at the main entrances, security teams were spread throughout the palace complex, and the Queen was preparing for her scheduled appearance. Even if they ordered immediate evacuation, the chaos of moving hundreds of people quickly would create its own security risks. Inspector, Martinez called out, her voice sharp with alarm. I've lost the basement feed. All cameras on that level just went dark. Sarah felt her heart rate spike. Webb had just eliminated their ability to track his movements in the most vulnerable area of the palace. Whatever he was planning, it was about to begin, and they no longer had any way to monitor his preparations or predict his next move. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Detective Inspector Sarah Chun made her way through the security checkpoint. It was supposed to be a routine visit to discuss updated protocols with the Royal Protection Unit. But something felt different today. The usual chatter among the guards was notably absent, replaced by hushed conversations and anxious glances. Sarah had spent 15 years with the Metropolitan Police, the last 5 specializing in dignitary protection. She knew the signs of tension when she saw them. Today, those signs were everywhere. Guards stood straighter, their eyes scanning constantly, and senior officers huddled in small groups, speaking in voices too low to overhear. Commander James Morrison, head of the Royal Protection Unit, greeted Sarah with a firm handshake, but his usual warm smile was nowhere to be found. Inspector Chin, thank you for coming on such short notice. We need to discuss some concerning intelligence we've received. They walked through the palace corridors, past portraits of monarchs from centuries past, their painted eyes seeming to watch every movement. Sarah had visited the palace dozens of times for security briefings, but today the weight of history felt heavier somehow. The very walls seemed to hold their breath. What kind of intelligence? Sarah asked as they entered Morrison's office, a cramped space filled with monitors displaying feeds from hundreds of security cameras throughout the palace grounds. Morrison closed the door and activated a white noise generator, standard procedure when discussing sensitive matters. 3 days ago, our counterterrorism unit intercepted communications suggesting a plot against the royal family. The details are vague, but the timing is specific. Today's garden party. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. The monthly garden parties were among the palace's most challenging security events. Hundreds of guests, from diplomats to charity workers, mingled on the palace grounds. Multiple entry points, vast open spaces, and countless variables made protection nightmarish even under normal circumstances. "How credible is the threat?" she asked, though Morrison's expression already provided the answer. "Credible enough that we've tripled security and brought in additional units. But here's what's troubling us most." Morrison turned to his computer and pulled up a series of photographs. These were taken outside the palace gates over the past week. Same individual, different times of day, always watching. The photographs showed a middle-aged man in ordinary clothes. Nothing remarkable about his appearance except for one detail that made Sarah's blood run cold. In every image, his eyes were fixed on the palace with an intensity that spoke of careful study rather than casual curiosity. "Have you identified him?" Sarah asked, leaning closer to examine the images. Marcus Webb, 43, former military with specialized training in explosives. Dishonorably discharged 3 years ago after a psychological evaluation deemed him unfit for service. Since then, he's been in and out of psychiatric facilities. Morrison pulled up additional files on his screen. Webb's military record showed exemplary service for 12 years before something changed. His commanding officers noted increasingly erratic behavior, paranoid ideation, and an unhealthy obsession with perceived injustices in society. The final incident that led to his discharge involved threats made against senior officials, though the details remained classified. "What's his connection to the royal family?" Sarah asked. "That's what we're trying to determine." His social media activity shows a gradual escalation of anti-establishment rhetoric over the past year. He seems to believe the monarchy represents everything wrong with British society. But it's more personal than political ideology. Morrison showed Sarah screenshots of Webb's online posts. The early entries were relatively mild complaints about inequality and privilege. But as months passed, the tone became darker, more focused. References to making them pay and showing the world their true faces appeared with increasing frequency. 6 months ago, his posts became specifically targeted at today's garden party. He somehow obtained the guest list and has been studying attendees, their backgrounds, their routines. This isn't random rage. This is calculated planning. Sarah studied the evidence, her mind racing through possibilities. Garden parties followed predictable patterns. Guests arrived through designated entrances, proceeded along predetermined routes, and gathered in specific areas of the grounds. Security was tight, but designed to be unobtrusive, maintaining the illusion of casual elegance while providing comprehensive protection. "Where's Webb now?" she asked. "Unknown. He hasn't been seen at his residence for 48 hours. His vehicle was found abandoned in a parking garage 2 miles from here. We have every available unit searching, but London is a big city with countless places to hide." Through Morrison's office window, Sarah could see preparation for the afternoon's event already underway. Staff members arranged tables and chairs on the perfectly manicured lawn, while security personnel conducted final sweeps of the grounds. In just a few hours, the Queen would emerge to greet her guests, unaware that somewhere in the city, a disturbed individual was preparing to turn celebration into catastrophe. "What's the current plan?" Sarah asked. "Cancel the event." Morrison replied without hesitation. "I've recommended immediate cancellation, but the palace has refused. The Queen believes canceling would send the wrong message, that it would show weakness in the face of unsubstantiated threats." Sarah understood the dilemma. The royal family had faced threats throughout history, and their response had always been to maintain normal schedules while relying on security professionals to handle protection. Canceling public events based on intelligence reports could set a dangerous precedent, effectively giving terrorists veto power over royal activities. "So we proceed with enhanced security?" Enhanced doesn't begin to cover it. We have armed response units positioned throughout the grounds, plainclothes officers among the guests, and snipers on every rooftop with line of sight to the garden. If Webb shows up, we'll be ready. But Sarah knew from experience that being ready wasn't always enough. Determined individuals with military training and nothing to lose could find ways around even the most comprehensive security measures. Webb had been studying this event for months, learning routines, identifying vulnerabilities, planning his approach with the patience of a professional soldier. What about the guests? Are they being screened differently today? Every invitation is being verified against multiple databases. Additional metal detectors have been installed, and we're conducting behavioral analysis on everyone entering the grounds. But with over 300 expected attendees, including foreign diplomats with their own security details, the complexity is staggering. Morrison's phone buzzed with an incoming message. He read it quickly, his expression growing even more grave. Webb's military file just revealed something we missed. Before his discharge, he completed advanced training in infiltration techniques. He knows how to blend in, how to avoid detection, how to get close to targets without raising suspicion. The pieces of Webb's plan were becoming clearer, but that only made the situation more frightening. This wasn't a case of an unstable individual acting impulsively. Webb had the skills, knowledge, and motivation to carry out a sophisticated attack against one of the most protected locations in Britain. There's something else, Morrison continued. Intelligence suggests he may not be working alone. Intercepted communications mentioned coordination and multiple vectors of approach. We could be looking at a coordinated attack involving several individuals. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Hundreds of innocent people would gather in the palace gardens in just a few hours, trusting that security professionals would keep them safe. Among them would be members of the royal family, making the event a target of international significance. Failure wasn't an option, but success required anticipating moves by an opponent who had been planning this moment for months. I want to review the guest list myself, Sarah said. If Webb has been studying attendees, there might be patterns we can identify. Someone he's particularly focused on, or an identity he might try to assume. Morrison handed her a tablet containing the complete guest database. Names, photographs, backgrounds, and arrival times for every invited individual. As Sarah scrolled through the entries, she realized the magnitude of the challenge they faced. Diplomats, charity leaders, business executives, and society figures from across the Commonwealth. Any one of them could be Webb's target, or worse, could actually be Webb himself using a stolen identity. The event begins in 4 hours, Morrison said, checking his watch. We need to finalize our response strategy. Every officer will be briefed on Webb's appearance and known associates. Counter-assault teams will be positioned for rapid deployment. Emergency medical units are standing by. But, ultimately, success depends on identifying the threat before it materializes. Sarah nodded, understanding that the next few hours would test every aspect of their training and preparation. Somewhere in London, Marcus Webb was making final preparations for an attack that could change British history. The only question was whether they could find him before he found his targets. The garden party that afternoon would either be remembered as a successful celebration of British tradition or as the day security failed in the most public and devastating way possible. As Sarah left Morrison's office to begin her own preparations, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial, some element of Webb's plan that would only become clear when it was too late to stop.